In the days after Ajaan Mun's cremation, the Dhutanga monks of his lineage wandered off in different directions, feeling like orphans who'd lost both parents. Most of the younger monks began searching for a reliable teacher to act as a refuge in Ajaan Mun's stead. Many of them congregated around his senior disciples, whom they had learned to admire and respect. Although these monks ended up scattered across the Northeast, their purpose remained the same: striving for the realization of Nibbāna. I myself headed south by foot, wandering Dhutanga as I always had, until I eventually reached my hometown in Chantaburi province. As my mother's health had continued to deteriorate, I spent a few busy weeks at Sīlaratano Forest Monastery, coordinating my mother's health care schedule with my brothers and sisters, who spared no expense of time or money to provide her with the best treatments available. As soon as I was convinced that my services were no longer needed, I approached Ajaan Lee and asked him to help me find a quiet, peaceful monastic setting somewhere in the forested regions of Chantaburi, a place where I could live in seclusion and still wholeheartedly serve the interests of the religion. He advised me to move to a place called Crystal Mountain and take up residence on the hilltop. Ajaan Lee had lived there several years previously. His austere lifestyle had so impressed the locals that they banded together to build a small pavilion and a bamboo hut for his stay. He named the monastery Crystal Mountain because the peaked hilltop appeared to draw the surrounding landscape up to a point of symmetry and concord. I found the monastery deserted, so I moved in straight away. I ended up residing there off and on for the next 10 years. By nature, I did not like to remain idle. I soon went to work making improvements to the original buildings and constructing new ones. Mostly I labored on my own, using whatever local materials were available. The original buildings had begun to crumble and decay, succumbing to the hot, humid climate of the jungle. Since the buildings needed stronger foundations, I borrowed an old sledgehammer and spent my afternoons breaking up the large stones scattered around the hilltop. I didn't bother to ask for anyone's help, and no one would have been able to keep up with me even if I had. When I needed lumber for posts and beams or for floorboards, I led a party of village men deep into the forest on the other side of the hill, where they felled trees and sawed the trunks into planks. We usually camped in the jungle overnight, slaving from dawn to dusk every day until the work was completed. We used long, two-man hand saws with wooden handles at each end to cut the big logs into flat boards. As one man pushed and the other pulled, the saw's teeth cut on both strokes to make a clean surface along the entire length of the log. When we had enough planks, we shouldered them through the thick jungle and up the hill to the monastery. The work was back-breaking but worthwhile because hardwood made excellent building material. Because I set very high standards for myself, I could be equally demanding with the work ethic of others. I expected a job to be done quickly and skillfully with no excuses or delays. Even though my helpers were local volunteers, I tended to be a hard taskmaster. I pushed myself to the limit, and everyone else was expected to follow suit. It was not in my character to talk sweetly and offer sympathies. On the contrary, on the occasions when I should perhaps have spoken softly, I yelled loudly instead. We had work to do. I just couldn't be bothered to speak politely. Due to my hard-nosed, tough attitude, the village men were often reluctant to join me when I called on them to help with a work project. If I could have managed it by myself, I would have. But I needed help for the jobs monks weren't allowed to do. I felt the village men should have been grateful for the opportunity to earn spiritual rewards for their hard work. They should have honored the Buddha's teaching on the fruits of meritorious actions. I did my best to repay the hard physical labor that the local people contributed to the monastery. On one occasion, I was invited to bless a newlywed couple at their family home. I felt reluctant to attend, but the parents were supporters of the monastery, and they were offering a meal. Their house was a typical village structure built on stilts with the main floor raised 5 feet above the ground. Because I arrived late, the other 8 monks who'd been invited had already taken their seats on the floor above, and the rest of the house was full of family members milling around. The staircase going up to the main floor was bustling with women and children. Piles of cast-off shoes littered its base. Because the building was elevated on wooden posts, the upstairs floor stuck out at the level of my chest and was enclosed at the top by a guardrail about 3 feet tall. Since I had no intention of waiting for the crowd on the staircase to make way, and I didn't want to elbow my way through that crowd to find my seat upstairs, I simply reached out, grabbed the base of the guardrail with my hand, and pulled my whole body up until my right knee rested on the edge of the floor upstairs. With my alms bowl slung around my neck and resting behind one shoulder, I raised my body to a standing position, swung one leg over the top rail, and straddled it under my crotch. With my legs swinging freely on either side of the railing, I pivoted and hopped down on the floor, to the speechless astonishment of all the monks and guests present. I quickly took my seat at the head of the row of monks, surveyed the disorder of family and friends moving about laughing and greeting one another, and cut the whole scene short by bellowing out, "Do you want the monks here to chant or not? If not, just bring in the food so we can eat." Since the owner obviously wanted us to bless his kids with auspicious chants, he was shocked by the sudden interruption. He blurted out, "Yes, please, sir." I felt indifferent to his embarrassment. If all he really wanted was an auspicious future for the married couple, then there was sufficient merit in offering a meal to the monks, even without the chanted blessing. What was the purpose of the chants supposed to be anyway? To bless the sexual exploits of a couple so they could make a family, grow old, get sick, and die like everyone else in this world of pain and suffering? In the end, we intoned the ritual chants and ate the meal without further comment. When the time came to leave, the upper floor was still congested, and the stairs leading down still crowded. What to do? My only option was to leave the house the same way I'd entered. With my bowl hanging from my neck, I straddled the railing again, arched one leg over the top, and gripped the railing to swing down to the ground. I could tell the young monks were embarrassed to watch a senior monk behave that way, but I felt unperturbed. Under the circumstances, it was the only sensible action to take. I probably reached the monastery before the other monks had even left their seats. It felt awkward and out of character for me to always address people in a polite and deferential manner, as though I had to pretend to be someone I wasn't. I never spoke with harmful intentions or hidden agendas. Just straight talk, no bullshit. For instance, an elderly matron from the royal palace in Bangkok showed up one day at Crystal Mountain Monastery while I was working on a construction project. The occasion was her birthday, for which she wanted to make merit by offering a donation. Having come directly from work, I was underdressed for the occasion. I wore an old and soiled waistcloth with the shoulder cloth hitched up high around my neck. I probably looked more like the gardener than the abbot. The lady, on the other hand, was painted up like one of the china dolls my mother kept on display in her glass cabinet at home. Never one for formality, I began hawking and spitting tobacco juice into an old, rusty tin can as we spoke. The poor lady looked alarmed. I could tell she was being very critical in her assessment of my conduct. Perhaps she was offended as well. I was happy that she had the chance to make merit for her birthday, but I could see that was the extent of her interest in coming to the monastery. Had she asked about Dhamma practice, that would have been another matter. I could be articulate when it came to the higher purpose of teaching Dhamma, but small talk was a waste of my time. When I needed a ride to take care of business somewhere in the district, I usually flagged down a passing truck on the road outside the monastery's gate. I found the easiest way to get the driver's attention was to stand in the middle of the road and wait for him to stop. As soon as he did, I quickly hopped on board, no permission asked. The driver had no choice, really. He couldn't run over a monk. Besides, I treated everyone I met as though they were a friend or a relative. I saw us all as equals, as companions in birth, aging, sickness, and death. All living beings were the same in that respect. Hell, I'd hitch a ride with an elephant if I could. Straddling the middle of the road with my legs spread apart while I adjusted my upper robe over both shoulders, I stopped whichever vehicle passed first. A farm truck headed to market, a local bus going to town, or a car of any kind. Once my business was finished, I returned to the monastery by the same means. One day, I received an urgent telegram from the Royal Dhamma Monastery in Bangkok, requesting that I go there immediately. As Crystal Mountain Monastery was a full day's drive from Bangkok, I quickly walked to the road and stopped a 10-wheel truck hauling fruit the long distance to the capital. When I found the cab crowded with passengers, many of them women, I hoisted myself up onto the truck bed and took a seat cross-legged on the roof of the cab. There I remained the whole day, the hot sun beating down on my head and the wind blowing in my face. By the time we reached Bangkok, I was worn out. To get from the fruit market to the royal monastery, I hailed the first taxi that passed by and jumped in. I didn't carry any money, of course, so the cabbie was in for a surprise. Heck, he was also a companion on the journey from birth to death, so I had no doubt that we'd work it out like brothers. I had been summoned to Bangkok to join a delegation of senior monks that was scheduled to attend a meal offering at the royal palace. When the royal representative arrived to escort us to the palace, I asked him if I would be required to take a monk's ceremonial fan for the occasion, as I assumed it was the proper etiquette. But he said no, just go as you are. I was fine with that. But during the royal ceremony, when the monks sat down to chant the blessing just before the meal began, one of the palace officials overseeing the ceremony pointed to me and asked loudly, "Why doesn't that monk have a fan?" Just as loudly, I shot back for all to hear, "Stop! Everybody stop! We can't proceed until I retrieve my fan from the monastery." My outburst spoiled the formal dignity of the occasion, stunning monks and royal householders alike. Softly and sternly, the palace official asked me why I had spoken up. I barked back, "I damn well asked before coming whether I needed a fan or not and was told no, so I didn't bring one." Heads hung and faces turned red, as the royal family solemnly carried on offering the meal. What is a fan, anyway? It's a badge of esteem used in formal monastic rituals. I had put up with those fans for ceremonial events, as they were promoted by the hierarchy of the administrative sangha to denote rank and scholastic achievement. Such achievements were hollow in the view of practicing forest monks, however. Did Ajaan Mun esteem the ranks that were bestowed on monks? Hardly. He respected levels of meditative achievement, samadhi ranks, and wisdom status. Real achievement comes from an internal struggle that involves effort, discipline, and great enthusiasm. This path leads to the inner strength needed in the fight to increase wisdom and lessen ignorance. The only true badge of honor, then, is the attainment of absolute freedom. Living at Crystal Mountain Monastery, I was free to leave my ritual fan tucked away in a storage cabinet. The Dhutanga monks who visited me never lugged one along when they came. We greeted and recognized each other by the Dhamma virtues in our hearts. Life at Crystal Mountain Monastery turned into an ongoing construction project. The only structurally sound building standing on the property when I arrived was the small pavilion where the monks gathered for meals and chanting. Even that was in poor condition. The few monks' huts that remained were falling apart. Roofs leaked and walls were missing. I resolved to renovate the old structures, build new ones, and develop the property into a fully functioning monastic hermitage. I was prepared to shoulder most of the physical burden. The local village headman agreed to provide the monastery with financial resources. I believed it was my duty to achieve success through hard work without wasting money or other resources. We started by upgrading the materials we used to build new residences for the monks. I experimented with mixing and pouring concrete to replace the rickety bamboo huts. Bags of cement were available in the local market. Sand was hauled in from the beaches, and, with my trusty sledgehammer, I crushed rocks to provide stone aggregate to complete the mix. It was physically demanding manual labor. Cement, sand, and stone were combined with water in a shallow pit in the ground adjacent to the building site and mixed by hand. I pushed and pulled the blade of a long-handled hoe back and forth through the heavy mixture until it became a thick slurry ready to pour. Fresh concrete was scooped into buckets, hauled to the site, and poured into wooden frames to make first the floor and later the walls. Mostly I toiled alone. The village headman was appreciative of my dedicated enthusiasm for the project, but he kept advising me to slow down and take it easy. It was all right to take time off to meditate, he cautioned. To that, I responded that I'd spent my entire monk's life meditating, and there was nothing left to attain. He insisted that I'd gone too far with my insistence on working so hard. Working at that pace, he couldn't find workers willing to help me. I lambasted him and his workers for being lazy bastards who preferred lolling around to working hard. By the time I left Crystal Mountain Monastery many years later, I'd built 4 concrete monks' residences, a new hardwood pavilion, and a towering concrete ordination hall. In other words, a fully functioning practice monastery. In addition, we planted a small forest of native trees covering the whole hilltop. One of my earliest complaints was the poor quality of the tools that were donated for my use. I was particularly frustrated by the low-grade metal used in making sharp-edged tools like hatchets, axes, and machetes. Within a week of chopping with a new axe blade, the cutting edge began to nick and fracture because the metal was weak and brittle. Shoddy materials and sloppy workmanship were to blame. Fed up with poor quality tools, I decided to take matters into my own hands and become my own blacksmith. Forging steel was a simple trade, but it required enormous strength, which suited my temperament very well. I built a small, charcoal-burning furnace behind my hut. I used leaf springs salvaged from the suspensions of old trucks because of their high strength, and heated the thick steel plates in the furnace's glowing charcoal until the metal became soft enough to shape using hand tools. When the metal was hot enough, I pulled it out, placed it flat side down on an anvil, and pounded it into shape with a large hammer. Once the metal reached its desired shape, I filed the sharp edge down to remove any imperfections and smooth the surface. I then heat-treated it in the forge one more time to achieve optimal hardness. The tools I made were far more durable than those sold at the market. Some idiots accused me of violating monastic discipline. They claimed the Buddhist monastic code forbade monks from forging their own tools. Nothing could be further from the truth. These are common monks' requisites. I made them for a useful purpose. How could there be a fault? I did not use them to kill living beings. I did not sell them to make a profit. Having done nothing unskillful in their making or in their use, how could my conduct be wrong? Besides, pounding red-hot metal bars into tools can be a Dhamma teaching. Think about it as pounding your defilements and laziness into submission. In the end, I gave most of my axes and hatchets away to other monks. Where was the harm? Even today, at a ripe old age, I still enjoy working at the forge behind my residence. My arrival at Crystal Mountain Monastery had initially been greeted with enthusiasm in the surrounding communities, and many of the locals had volunteered to work on my construction crews. But the villagers also had their own work to do and their own lives to live. After the major building projects were completed, the majority of them returned to their mundane affairs and lost interest in the forest monastery on the hill. Villagers were grateful to have an opportunity to put food in the forest monks' bowls in the morning, but most of them didn't expect much more from the religion than that chance to make merit. Nevertheless, a small group of villagers who were deeply inspired by forest monks and their lifestyle did become regular supporters of Crystal Mountain Monastery. In the meantime, a number of monks and novices began to gather around me on Crystal Mountain, and I led them in undertaking an austere and vigorous meditation regimen. I pressed them to eat less, sleep less, talk less, and instead put their effort into sitting and walking meditation. Often we sat in meditation or practiced walking meditation from dusk till dawn. This group of monks included some of my earliest disciples. I gave them special attention because I knew the kind of momentum and intensity of effort needed to break through the walls of craving and delusion. I was in no mood for compromise, so I pushed my disciples to their limits. I always told them that if they genuinely aimed for liberation, they would have to courageously stare death in the face. Those who could put up with the pressure stayed on and prospered. Those who couldn't soon left. The early disciples who persevered in putting my teachings into practice later became well-respected teachers in their own right and built monasteries and forest hermitages in wilderness areas of the country's northwestern region. I tried to inspire in my disciples an enthusiasm for the training, stressing the patient endurance that was needed for them to succeed in reaching their goal. My aim was to instill in their minds the attitude that every detail has significance and every action has consequences. Nothing was to be done in a lazy, slipshod frame of mind. Attention and careful consideration had to be given to every endeavor. I repeatedly hammered home the message that mindfulness must be sustained in every activity and tirelessly admonished the monks when I caught them being heedless.